Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Jennifer Randall, and we're going to start off by welcoming the Lumbee Warriors. If everyone will please stand up. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order. Order. Flag. Face. Forward. Follow. March. Follow. March. Follow. March. Follow. March.
You may be seated. So again, welcome. If you just got here, my name is Jennifer Randall. I'm the Special Collections and Archives Librarian here at the Livermore Library. And we're going to start off with the beginning of a documentary called Far From Home.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see.
My brother went in 41 before Pearl Harbor. He went overseas in 42, February of 42. And it went for months, you see, and hadn't written home. And my mother was very depressed. My father came from the field one day, and I remember good as just about 10 o'clock. And he told my mother not to worry over my brother anymore, because the Lord had assured him he would come home. 2 weeks, she gained her health back. She had that much faith in my father's prayer. Well, the night that I went over was to leave to go overseas, 40 people would testify to what I'm telling you. My father, I won't just take it short, my father asked me to come around. I was going to slip away. I didn't want to hear no tears, but being honorable to my father, I went around. And he said, son, we have to pray. And he prayed. And when I started to go to the door to leave, catch the train, he says, son, you'll come back home.
And when I came back from World War II, hugging and kissing my mother, and she said she prayed a many night, all night for me. And said, didn't I tell you, you'd come back like you left? And my first cousin and a man right up here It cussed his mother and dad anyway. He was killed in that battle I told you about. The bullet boy up here too killed two of his daddy's mules. He didn't come back alive.
When I got that draft notice, I read that thing. Me, my mother, my father, we sat down, talked about it. I really didn't understand why that I had to go in to the service. My mother explained to me this is a job that all young men have to do.
To college, and somewhere during the first quarter, we were on the quarter system, and first quarter came some fellas by to in the service and gave a little test, and 4 or 5 wee boys passed the test, so we were enlisted in the enlisted reserve, put in enlisted reserve corps, which means that they said at that time we'd finish 3 years college before we went in service, but that was all a joke.
After go, I had point system. I volunteered, you see. My father still could have kept me out of service. He had kept me out 1 year. We had what we call enough land. Each so many acres of land represented a point, and I had enough of point, or my father had enough of points due to farming to keep his sons out of service.
With the train run right in front of the docks, and we got off and went inside, and there was this big thing sitting there on the side, water running out of the side of it through holes, and well, it looked scary. You know, I'd never been nowhere, didn't know anything about ships or nothing, and on the side of that ship it said, not on the ship, but on the side of the building, it said Indochina. And I said, oh, Lord, I'm going to China.
Air Force Basic.
In Miami Beach,
At Miami Beach, Florida, lived in the hotel. I was on the 4th floor, Warford was in the 6th floor, and we over on Ocean Drive. I could take and look out the window and see the ocean out there. And all it was, just across the street and through some palm trees. And
I left here and I went to Arkansas for basic training. From here I went up to Baltimore. Then we shipped out of New York City for Europe. I was in Europe. I came back home for a few days on furlough. Then they shipped me to California, and I spent several months out in California, and I got to see the west coast of California. 3 older boys. My older brother James, he was in the Air Force, and he was killed. His plane went down over the Caribbean Sea. It's possible, good chance, that a sub shot him down. That was taking place at that time. Had another brother. He was over in Europe for about 3 years. And then I joined them on the last phase of the war. So there was 3 of us.
my name is Reese Bullard. I was born about 2.5 miles, a little bit northwest of here, 2.5 miles. And I was born July the 26th, 1923.
Okay, my name is Earl Shepard. I was born and raised in Robeson County, and not far from here, and raised on a farm. We farmed, we grew tobacco, corn, and cotton when I was growing up. That's all we had, tobacco, corn, and cotton. And we lived on a farm. It wasn't our farm then. We sharecropped. And we lived on a gentleman's farm with the name of Adrian B. McCrae. He used to be a big politician here in the county.
I'm William Stinson Sampson. I was born December the 4th, 1924. I am the son of Newton Sampson and Vilena Sampson. We were farmers here in Robeson County. My father was a share farmer. He farmed in Robeson County and Scotland County. I was raised on a farm until I was 18.
Milford Oxenine Senior. I was raised about 1.5 miles north of here on a farm.
I'm Kurt Locklear. I was born in Robeson County. I'm 72 years old. And I've lived here all my life except for 3 years overseas during the war, World War II.
I'm James B. Locklear, Pembroke, North Carolina. Present day route is Route 1, Box 322-A. I was born and reared approximately 3 miles from Pembroke on Highway 72 east. My father was a farmer. I grew up on the farm. When I was a young boy, I didn't know anything else I would have an opportunity to do but the farm. My father had made a success as a farmer, and I was asked when I was in the 5th grade, what would I prefer to do in life? I said, a farmer. I knew but 3 things I could do at that time. I could farm, become a school teacher, or a minister.
My name is Vardell Sweat. I was born here in Robeson County in the year of 1925. Well, we always lived on a farm, grew tobacco, cotton, corn, soybeans. We always had a good number of pigs, chicken, normally 2 to 3 cows.
When you share crop with someone, they own the land and you work the land. They furnished the house that you stayed in. They furnished the land that you stayed in. Also, they furnished the mules that you worked the land with. We furnish the labor. At the end of the year, sometimes we would get half of the crop. Sometimes we would get 1/3 of the crop. This means every $3 we made, we got 1. The landowner, he got 2.
To plow good, you hold your plow about like that, and it will, if it got a wing in it, it'll cover up all that grass and stuff as you go along. The first mule that my father had, her name was Pet, and he said he gave $475.75 for that mule. He never did have to put a muzzle on that mule to keep it from eating anything. And you could tell the GR, and that was it. You didn't have to put no stakes to lay off your rows if you was running rows from here out there to college.
We started off playing with an ox. Yes. And he did as good a job as a mule would do. And he was plowed day after day. I can remember that ox now. When you say G, he went to the right. When you say haw, he went to the left.
I was about 6 years old when I first went to plowing. I was so small I couldn't hold the plow handles. There was a little round inside of the plow handles that kept the plow handles together, and I used that round to guide the plow with because I wasn't high enough to reach the handles.
You didn't have no trouble with that mule. Just G or haw, and that was it and doing. And if the plow, you'd hit stumps, the pointed times, and hit you in your ribs and knock you out. It may lay that 3 or 4 hours before you could get up. You'd be knocked out, so laying down on the ground.
My father furnished the mules and the plows, and the landlord, he furnished the fertilizer and seed. See? And that's the way it worked. I was small. I've always been small, and I plowed. And I could hardly reach the handles properly, and it was kind of difficult, but I did what we call breaking land with a turning plow. See? 1 mule and a turning plow. My father used 2 mules sometime and a turning plow. So I was small, but I could plow.
The wheat was harvested in, I'd say, late June. And then they would bag it up, and as my father needed wheat, he would take it to the mill where they would grind it into flour. And that homegrown flour is just delicious. A nice biscuit made out of that homegrown flour. It has a yellow cast, nice brown crust, and it's very delicious.
I was in Florida when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I was in Florida, in Camp Blandon, Florida. You know, they had a song that they played then, "I'll be back in a year, little darling." And of course, it won't no way. No, that was just a saying then. I'll be back in a year. But they knew you weren't going to be back home in a year.
All right, so that documentary, again, was Far From Home. That documentary was actually created in the mid-90s by Dr. Stanley Nick. He was a videographer, and he was also the former director of the American Indian, or the Museum of the Southeast American Indian over across campus. All right. So again, I'm Jennifer Randall. We're here today to talk about our newly digitized collection, Robeson County and the Second World War. And again, thank you all for coming. So, Native Americans played a significant role in the Second World War. The Native community in and around Robeson County is really representative of that. According to the National Museum of the American Indian, about 44,000 Natives saw active duty in World War II, which is about 5 to 10% of the total Native population during that time, with an approximate 150,000 American Indians participating in some sort of military, agricultural, or industrial job that supported the war effort otherwise, with many members of this community playing prominent roles in the war. For example, Thomas Oxendine of Pembroke became the first American Indian to be commissioned as a pilot in the U.S. Navy. He went on to become a commander.
I know him.
Yeah?
My brother.
Really? Wow. These two photos were actually from the Library of Congress. They show Pembroke in 1939. They were taken just before the start of the war. These photos show Mr. John Bunyan Locklear and his family on their farm in Pembroke Farms. Pembroke Farms was a resettlement community created by the Farm Security Administration in the late 1930s for struggling Indian farmers in the area. These photos, along with others, are available on the Library of Congress's website. They were taken by Marion Post Wolcott in the last years of the Great Depression. As with the rest of the country, the area was struggling financially. Crop prices were down before the start of the war. The major cash crop of the area, as I'm sure most of you know, was tobacco. Corn and cotton still played a significant role, but tobacco has always dominated the market here in North Carolina. And you've heard a lot of the agricultural stories reflected in that documentary, but most of this community was rural farmland, and a lot of it still is. These images are from the 1942 Lumbee Tatler, which was the yearbook before it eventually became the Indian Head. You can also see the 1942 Lumbee Tatler digitized on our website, and I'll show you how you can view all of that, plus this entire collection from our website. So the first part of the collection that I'm going to focus on are war records of Robeson County Indians. So I stumbled upon a box about a year ago full of these documents. The origins of these documents are still unknown, to me at least, but there's about 70 or so of them, and they were handed out to members of the community who were fighting in the war. Most of them were filled out by the servicemen, but there are a few that were filled out by their family or friends. Here is Mr. Carly Gordon Hunt. A lot of people will recognize him. His also included this photo, which I absolutely love this photo. But you'll see they asked a plethora of information of the service people. The first being, who are you? But one thing that stuck out to me immediately was, who are your parents? It's a concept I've grown familiar with here. Who's your people? We've all been who's your people. but I found that striking that we were doing that even then. But it goes on to ask education, date of entrance into the service, where you were stationed, and more. And you'll notice as you go through the collection that some service people provided a lot more information than others. Mr. Hunt had a pretty lustrous career in the military. I believe that he was a prisoner of war for a time, and then when he was liberated, returned to the United States, he actually re-enlisted and went back. So his is full of really good first-hand information. And as I said, there are about 70 or so accounts, and they're all available on the website. Another really interesting one here is from Staff Sergeant James Alton Barnes about his time when he was stationed in Hawaii. So he added this paragraph at the bottom about how much he loved playing sports and how good he was at sports. But he goes on to talk about how he played with the Hawaii League, and their very last game of the season was just hours before Pearl Harbor, so the night before Pearl Harbor. So he has a really good first-hand account of Pearl Harbor. So the next item that I found was this scrapbook. So you can see, I hope you can see, it's a really striking cover. You can see the eagle and the planes and everything, but it's labeled Indians in Service, World War II. So scrapbooks are kind of tricky in archives. You have to know how to deal with them, and this one was no exception. Scrapbooks really aren't made to last, especially this one. It was full of newspaper clippings. And if you don't know, newspaper is sort of an inherent vice. It destroys itself. It decays way faster than other types of paper. So I knew as soon as I got in here, I needed to digitize that, because add in newspaper with the adhesive in this scrapbook from 3/4 of a century ago, and it's sort of a recipe for disaster. So digitizing this was my main priority. So one thing I found when I was going through these articles in the scrapbook was how important newspapers were back then. And even, I remember how big newspapers were when I was a kid, which I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but I remember the Sunday paper being hefty. And it's really not anymore. It's really taken on a different life. But back then, it was how you checked in on people, especially during times of war. And so I was looking at these and I was like, oh, it's like social media. And so people would post this information when they wanted their friends, their community, their family members to know anything that was going on with them. And so you see this winged list here. You see this person who was missing in action, Private Warren G. Lowry, and then people asking for their friends and relatives to write letters to them where they're stationed. And then over here was sort of a cool editorial that I saw where the soldier writes about his views and just how we can actually achieve peace. So it's a really interesting editorial, and you'll see a lot of that reflected there. And then there were sadder updates where you open the paper and you look and your friend, Private Leo Hunt, has been killed in action. And then just like that other editorial, you have these other updates here. These are 2 poems that were written during the war that reflect on just the atrocities of the war and how it was affecting these people. And the one on the right, he wrote, "In play he was a pal. The humble boy we love to see is gone to Uncle Sam. He smiled through all his sorrow, and as he went away, 2 tiny hands were held in his. We wanted him to stay. Today an angel mother waits at home for her dear son. I pray that God will guide her boy through manhood and safely home." And so it's a really striking poem that a soldier's family member wrote. I actually did the research to see who wrote it and see who he wrote it about, and he actually wrote it about Ollie Vernon Hunt, and I did a bunch of little ancestry record searching, and he did make it home, got married, he lived a very full life. So I thought that was really interesting. And so when you go on our website, you can see all of these articles plus hundreds of others. They're sort of divided up, or they were intended to be divided up with by the last name of the subject of the article. So AA or AB on one page and then CD, and that worked really well, but however, there are a lot of oxidines and there are a lot of Chavises. So some of those records were just, they put them where they fit. So other than those, everything else is alphabetical and it's pretty easy to find. And then by 1945, the war was finally over, but nothing would really be the same again. In 1946, the Lumbee Tattler became the Indian head. And you can see here that year it was dedicated to current students whose lives were lost in the war. And they're Wade Lowry, James Sweat, Marvin Chavis, and Burl Thompson. And this was really striking, and you can see Old Main here, another iteration of Old Main. And then what I'm going to do next is just demonstrate how everybody can access these collections. Okay, so if you were to go to our website, and you can do this at home, you can do this here, anywhere you connect to the internet, and you can do it from your computer, from your laptop, from a tablet, even from your phone if you just really want to look at a really tiny screen. But any way that you connect to the internet, you can access our website. And so this is just library.uncp.edu. And then I'm over here on the right, Special Collections and Archives. And this is everything that we have currently. But for this, you're going to want to go to Digital Collections over here on the left and go in. And you're going to see everything we currently have digitized. It's not a lot currently, but we are working on it, and we have a lot more projects coming up soon. But for this collection, it's Robeson County in the Second World War. And you'll see everything that we talked about today. The first thing, the documentary, Far From Home, it's actually in its entirety about an hour long, and you can view that online. And hopefully your internet connection is a little faster than ours. But I do recommend hovering over it, and then right over here, you can view it full screen so you really get the full effect of everything. But it's a really good documentary. Not only does it talk about going into the war, it talks about their lives coming back home from war in a segregated Robeson County. So it's really, really interesting. So I'm gonna go back, and the next thing is the scrapbook. And it's called Indians in Service, and you can see that cover. And what I recommend is making it full screen so that you can actually zoom in and actually view every article, because they are teeny tiny. But I digitized them in their entirety just as they appeared in the scrapbook when I found it. And you can skip from page to page, and you can see how they are separated, in theory, by the last name. And then the final thing was those war records of Robeson County Indians. You can see they're all here, and you can scroll down. They're separated by the first letter of the first name of the ones that we have. And most are 2 pages. However, some do have a photograph, like Mr. Glenn Lockyer here. And he looks so young in this photo, and it's sort of why I chose it for a lot of the flyers. He just looks so young. But you would just click the next page, and you can view everything that they answered in all of those documents. Okay? And there's one more resource that I wanted to go over today, and it's actually not from us. I met with the folks over at the North Carolina State Archives a few months ago, and we had a long talk, and they are now prioritizing records of natives in North Carolina. And they now have a full-time military archivist named Ashley Radda, and they would love it if you reached out to them and looked for any information about your ancestors. They have records from
natives fighting the Revolutionary War in every war since. And they haven't had everything digitized yet, but they do want to prioritize, like I said, native voices. So definitely reach out to them. And you can contact her via email or just call the state archives. And other than that, I want to thank you guys for coming. I know it was super short, but there is free food in the back. And please keep an eye out for events in the future. We do have renovations going on, and once the room opens up, we're going to have a lot more events like this in the future. If anybody has any questions, I'll be here. But other than that, that's it. Thank you all for coming.